Okay, as you just heard, this meeting will be recorded. The Zoom application will notify you that this meeting is being recorded. Please press continue on the Zoom application to stay in the meeting. Use the raise your hand feature in Zoom when you would like to speak on an item and also to lower your hand when you're finished speaking. Please unmute when called to speak and mute yourself when you are done speaking. If you are calling in by phone, identify yourself by name before speaking on an item. Press *9 on your phone to raise and lower your hand, and press *6 if you are participating by phone to unmute. This is the call to order for the February 14th, 2026 meeting of the Charter Review Committee. Will staff please call roll?
Holly Roberts.
Yes.
Pat Nikolai.
Here.
Bernard Tanzi.
Here.
Mohammed Naveed.
I'll note, Mr. Chair, Member Naveed was not able to be present tonight, but he will be, while not actively participating, observing the meeting for as long as he can.
John Brooks.
Here.
Joe Sosinski.
I am here for Joe Sosinski.
Eric Crutchlow.
Here.
Bert Field. Steve Kelly. Lauren Diamond.
I'm here.
Thank you. Eric Jensen.
Here.
Mark Beckman.
Here.
Susan Peters.
Here.
Mr. Chair, I'll also note for the record, Mr. Field had given us a notice that something had come up on an issue he needed to attend to, so he will not be able to participate tonight and will be absent.
But there are two people remotely who are participating. Okay, we'll get down to business then. Actually, good evening. My name is Pat Nikolai, and I'm the chair of the Charter Review Committee. On behalf of the committee, welcome to today's meeting. At this time, please turn off or mute all electronic devices, including cell phones that may interrupt the meeting. All right, we'll get down to general business. The first item of general business is approval of the January 21st, 2026 Charter Review Committee meeting minutes. Staff, is there a presentation?
Yeah, we'll get to that in one sec. More housekeeping because of the remote participation, Mr. Chair. We do need to announce and note for the record that committee member Lauren Diamond is participating remotely from the location indicated on the agenda, and member Sosinski is also participating remotely pursuant to the just cause provisions under SB 707. And if we could ask both of those remote participants to indicate for the record that there is no one over the age of 18 in the room with them, or if there is such a person, to identify that such a person is there.
Nope, no such person here.
No one here either.
Very good. Now back over to you, Mr.
Excellent. So the approval of the meeting minutes. Staff, is there a presentation?
Yeah, briefly, you guys are used to this by now. This is an action to approve the minutes for your January 21st meeting. The minutes were distributed in your packet. They're just summary action minutes. They're not verbatim minutes. If anyone has read them and wants to propose a correction or modification, you can. If you were not in attendance on January 21st, it's still okay for you to vote. If you believe the minutes accurately reflect what transpired at the meeting, it's also okay to abstain. Before we take action, Chair Nikolai, we do need to ask if there's any public comment, like for any other action item, and you'll need a motion and a second in order to call for the roll call vote.
Excellent. Do any committee members have any questions? Hearing none, is there any public comment on this item?
No, there's not.
Okay, great. I'd like to invite a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Staff, if we could have a roll call vote on that.
Holly Roberts,
Yes.
Pat Nicolai,
Yes.
Bernard Tansey,
Yes.
Mohammed Naveed is not present. John Brooks,
Yes.
Joe Sasinski,
Aye.
Lauren Diamond,
Yes.
Eric Jensen,
Yes.
Mark Beckman,
Yes.
Susan Peters.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, we'll go to the next general business item, which is report outs from ad hoc subcommittees. As the 6 groups, do I need to read the titles of each group, Glenn?
You do not. Chief, I'm sorry, Chair. I've got them listed on the slides. We're working on, there we go. Now we're able to forward the slide, it looks like.
Excellent.
If
have
we
a
can
staff
go all the way
presentation.
to the next. Here's our subcommittees. Chief, we've got all of them listed here. We're going to have substantive report outs from Group 2, Group 4, and Group 6 with updates in the discretion of the participants of those other groups. And so the next slide will present the first group, Group 1. Group 1 is powers and structure of city government, rules and process for action. Just historically, this group has met 3 times as listed on the presentation. Since the last report out at your January 21st meeting, this group has not met, and the next meeting is to be determined. Definitely recommending for any of the groups that want to get a meeting on calendar that we go through the process we have been going after this meeting is over and gather and try to get that, scheduled for the agenda. So nothing substantive from staff to report on Group 1 unless any member of Group 1 has anything they'd like to offer.
I just a note, I sent an email to the Group 1 members with soliciting some dates. So we should have a date by tomorrow that we'll send to the city.
Very good. We'll be on the lookout for that. Courtney's now taken over those scheduling. Very good. Next group, next slide. It's Group 2, City Council, elections, power, and conduct of meetings. This group had met a number of times, including on December 8th and January 20th. They've also met since the last report out on February 9th, 2026. And they also have a meeting scheduled for March 9th, 2026. And I have a report out for this group that I can offer with obviously contributions from the members that were in attendance to supplement that presentation. The February 9th meeting of Group 2 was attended by members Kelly, Beckman, and Roberts. The meeting convened around 6:10, adjourned around 7:56. There was a staff presentation that included the distribution of the minutes template that all of the subcommittees have now gotten for purposes of taking notes to facilitate report outs. The presentation included a recap of the subcommittee's activities and then a pretty substantial follow-up on the issues that were identified at their January 20th subcommittee meeting. The issues that were presented and discussed included additional information that was requested regarding city council salary setting process, including benchmarking, which means comparison to other jurisdictions, to help determine what, if any, charter changes were necessary. The question had been presented, can a city council person be a city employee? The short answer that I won't torture this group with is no, based on a variety of different both common law and statutory provisions related to incompatible offices and conflicts of interest. There was a discussion on the possible conversion of the city meeting requirement from 2 per month, which the council currently, or which the charter currently requires, to a more aggregate 24 per year. There was general support for exploring this with a suggested amendment to that to require at least 1 meeting per month as part of that presentation, and we're looking into that further. There was also discussion of what constitutes a vacancy of an elected or appointed position. We'll talk about that in a little bit. There was a presentation on what the quorum requirements and meeting management protocols were. There are provisions in the charter that speak to that, but there's also a much more detailed city council policy that was recently adopted with meeting management protocols that was reviewed with the group, with a good discussion about the level of detail that under best practices belongs in the charter as opposed to the level of detail that implements those basic charter provisions either in the code or in city policies. And there was also a good discussion about beefing up a description of what the city council member duties were. There really aren't, like there are for a lot of the other positions, and for the mayor, kind of a list of the duties and responsibilities. City council doesn't really have that. And the thought was to add at least some basic, duties and responsibilities there, including the addition of the concept of the city council people being required to conduct themselves with professionalism and with, courtesy, consistent with a number of the existing, provisions under the city's ethics and behavioral code. The vast majority of the time for that group was spent discussing the ambiguity that exists within the charter provision regarding city council salary. In some instances, it talks about salary and how that's determined. And then in other instances, it talks about compensation, but it's not really clear with respect to the salary or compensation part, what additional aspects of compensation they might be talking about. And so there was some discussions about what the existing structure was for making that determination. Back in 2018, there was a charter amendment that took the existing standard for mayor and city council compensation and established that, and then turned over the analysis of whether there should be any future increases to a salary setting commission that was obligated to meet every couple of years to decide whether or not to increase the salary or not, and with a cap every 2 years on that increase by 10%. There is also currently provided to city council persons and the mayor an option, should they so elect, to be covered by the city employee pension benefits under CalPERS. I think some have elected that, others have not. And recently, the Salary Setting Commission had talked about, but ultimately decided not to provide medical benefits to city council people. So there was a lot of information gathered and shared regarding what other jurisdictions paid, whether or not they paid medical benefits or not, with a consensus amongst the group that while the charter shouldn't be changed in any structural way or to modify, the current salary structure in there, there ought to be some clarity added to what compensation meant with some language that I'm charged with drafting, to bring back, for their consideration, including the possible provision of medical benefits, again, should the salary setting commission decide not, the CRC or the charter itself. So working within the existing structure to eliminate ambiguity was kind of where that committee ended up on that, and then further discussions will occur. The other issue that the group spent some time talking about was, as I mentioned, the concept of a definition of what constitutes a vacancy. While the existing charter says if a vacancy occurs, what the appointment process would be to fill that vacancy, but nowhere in the charter does it define what a vacancy actually is. Consistent with best practices and to make less work for elected officials, members in the public, and my office, the recommendation was made that some basic kind of best practice definitions of what a vacancy, means was proposed, with a list that was presented, a tentative list of about 8 or 10, the instances of what defines a vacancy, ranging from the obvious death to maybe the less obvious, a conviction of a crime of moral turpitude, or an assumption of another office that might be incompatible to the holding of a city council or mayor's position. So all that's going to be worked out further, and a fair amount of time was spent talking about that. That's what I have for my summary of the group 2 meeting. Is anyone else from group 2 here wants to add any detail to that?
We just had homework to go over the council meeting procedures and protocols document and discuss that in a little bit of detail as well.
Very good, Mr. Chair. With that, I can go on to group 3's report out. Group 3 met on January 12th, 2026, and they reported out at the January 21st meeting. Since that last report out, they've not met, and the next meeting is to be determined. This is another group that probably wants to gather and identify a spot if folks can get together on that. I think Chair, you suggested March 11th as a possible date.
March 11th, and I know that works for the members that are here, but the other 2 are online, so hopefully that'll work for everybody.
Yeah, very good. We'll make a note of that and send a confirmation out. I understand one of the things that was discussed at that last meeting was a desire to have current Chief Morgan come and present and talk about the duties and qualifications aspect of the chief of police position. And if he's available on that date, we'll engage with him and try to secure his attendance and presentation on that issue. Very good. Thank you. Group 4 is the boards and commissions composition, powers, and duties group. Meetings have been held in the past in November and December. And since the last report out at the January 21st meeting, another meeting was held on February 12th, 2026. This group also was able to schedule another meeting upcoming on March 12th, 2026. The report out from group 4 that I attended and provided staff support to is as follows, again, with the members more than welcome to chime in. I think member Field was going to be reporting out on this one, but since he's not able to attend, I assured him that I'd step in and help out with that. So all members of this group were in attendance at the February 12th meeting. Diamond, Brooks, Field, and Szynski. Meeting convened at 6:10, adjourned at 8:08. Staff presentation included the distribution of the meeting minutes template, recap of committee activities, and an extensive presentation and solicitation of input on the assigned sections, including in this case, draft language. We're really starting to get into it with this group with a lot of draft language presented. The issues presented and discussed, including adding a requirement for adequate staff support for boards and commissions. There's a provision for adequate funding, but not staff support. Cross-referencing the language, defining what constitutes a vacancy, as I talked about with the earlier group. The boards and commissions have vacancies too. The same terminology should be used to apply to a vacancy for them as it would for a city council person. And there was also a fair amount of discussion on the pros and cons of potentially adding a for cause requirement for non-reappointment or removal, or at least more transparency, in that process with policies developed, if not in the charter, at a city council ordinance or policy level. There was discussions about deleting language which appeared to allow closed session meetings of any board or commission, contrary to the provisions of the Brown Act. There's consensus that, of course, ought to be removed. And there was also, and this is that was a substantial discussion on the pros, cons, and appropriateness of adding an ethics commission as a charter required board or commission, right? This group, the board and commission group, is looking at both the existing language and thought it appropriate to consider whether or not another charter-based, board or commission should be added as part of the charter project and this committee's recommendation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute because that was the brunt of their conversation. Also talked about eliminating or limiting the investigation authority that's currently afforded to different boards or commissions. That's really an extraordinary power that really doesn't apply to most of the roles and functions of the existing boards and commissions. So a discussion was initiated by my group of either eliminating or limiting that power because those boards and commissions don't engage, investigations as part of their normal duties. We also talked about formal input from the Planning Commission, Parks and Rec Commission, and the Board of Library Trustees. We're still trying to coordinate schedules so we can get in front of those groups and solicit their input. We actually already have done that with respect to the Board of Library Trustees. They had a meeting scheduled to finalize their thoughts for a recommendation and presentation to this group. But that they were not able to hold that meeting. They are now scheduled to meet on March 2nd. And so we're expecting after that meeting, which I will also attend to help, explain the process and coordinate the communications between groups, that they will be available to meet at your next meeting on March 12th, 26th. So I'll communicate that availability of time. And I think they're designating the chair of the BLT, Jonathan Evans, to be their representative to communicate that with the group. I'll try to go quickly here with the report out on the concept of Board of Ethics, because a lot was talked about. This was a holdover issue that the group had raised at the meeting before, this ad hoc subcommittee. And there really was a consensus to add something in the charter regarding ethics, right? Exactly what that is still under discussion. The range of options could be a specific reference and creation of an ethics commission with a general statement of its role and function, to a more general reference on the other end of the spectrum to an ethics program that could include provisions for standards, training, and accountability. In other words, not a commission, but at least some program that would be established, not within the charter, but by the council and or some other process. What I communicated to this group that they didn't have the benefit of the last time was the current status of the city's ethics program and the evaluation that's currently going on at the Council Governance and Ethics Committee to look at this very subject of what the options are for an ethics committee and whether or not there might be alternatives, to that. Some benchmarking was presented of the 19 charters that we have posted as comparable in some way, shape, or another for this reference. Only 4 of those actually had charter-based references to an ethics commission, and those were the larger cities of LA, Oakland, Sacramento, and San Francisco. There was a general recognition that this was a complex area and that the charter, this version of this charter group couldn't possibly, tackle all of that. So I think there's an understanding whatever's done, the details would need to be worked out in some other process. There was also recognition, in addition to that, that the addition of an ethics commission in the charter would probably be a level 3, matter that might be of sufficient sensitivity or independent significance that if it were proposed, it might warrant treatment as a separate ballot measure as opposed to part of the comprehensive ballot recommendation that this group is working towards. There are a lot of other things that were talked about, really good, extensive conversation. I was charged with coming back, Mr. Chair, with some language to touch on that range of options for them to evaluate, with ultimately them, of course, making a recommendation to this larger group about what, if anything, should be done to address the Ethics Commission issue. Any Group 4 members want to chime in to add or subtract from my update on that group's meeting?
No. Good job, Glenn. I think you covered it.
Say the same thing. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you. So next group 5, civil service general rules for classified and unclassified employees, commission composition and duties. This group's met quite a few times. As you can see here, they've not met since the last report out because, as you know, there was a substantial report out there, including with language that this committee authorized an initiation of a process to have that language presented to the Civil Service Commission and ultimately to the impacted labor groups in a required meet and confer process for them to provide input, on possible impacts they view in that language. The hope was that we would be further down the road with that process at this point. And this is a report out that of the status that Sue Reuter provided to me. Thanks, Sue. That she intended to take the proposed red lines of those sections that were presented to this group and Article 11 to the Civil Service Commission as the first step. The meeting was scheduled for February 12th, but was canceled due to a lack of quorum. Their next meeting is March 12th. And she will be sending to them an explanatory email with a link to the last CRC meeting recording as her way of apprising them kind of where we're at. Concurrently, she'll also be sending an update communication to the City Council so that City Council is aware of where we're at with the process and can identify if they have any issues or concerns with us, at least going down the path of initiating this meet and confer process. Once those communications have occurred and no issues have identified, city staff will begin the engagement with the bargaining groups to discuss the substantive changes. And then they'll be returned back to the subcommittee and or the larger group based on the input that they get, on those sections. And so it may or may not make sense for Group 5 to set another meeting at this time. I'm going to talk to Sue about that, but that's where things are at with Group 5 in the implementation of the good work that they've done to date. Finally, Group 6 met after some challenges in getting folks coordinated. I know everyone's got so many meetings, including more than one subcommittee meeting, but this group was able to get together on February 4th, 2026. Members Brooks, Field, and Crutchlow were in attendance. Another 2-hour meeting. As you can see here, again, the distribution of minutes template, some preliminary staff identified areas for improvement, including review of various sections and some initial drafting suggestions occurred. And then actions were taken at that meeting to appoint member Crutchlow as chair, Field as vice chair, and Brooks as secretary, who again has deputized me today at least to report out for this first meeting, hoping I'll lose my voice eventually and we can end the meeting maybe earlier. The next meeting is to be determined with a desire to schedule attendance by the finance director, Ken Lee, and or the public works director, Craig Mobeck, because these sections very much implicate, their groups, and a lot of the feedback I got and presented as staff's presentation to this group came from those two. The key issues that were identified and discussed were as follows. First of all, in the category of the finance sections, there's a keen interest from the finance department to update provisions in the fiscal section to match current budgeting, actual and best practices for when they need conforming changes throughout to allow for biannual budgeting. Currently, the charter only talks about an annual budget, but in fact, the city's been for a good number of years now, been doing 2-year budgets, not single-year budgets, and that creates some inconsistencies in both process and carryovers of funds that need to be updated to current practices. There's also an update to the budget preparation and approval process that's warranted, including, as most of you have noticed, in your various sections calling for public notices, the addition of electronic notices as opposed to newspaper notices to folks to solicit their input on the budget, and more time for public review and input before approval. Right now, that's a very tight time frame from the date that the budget needs to be drafted and presented to council to the time when the council needs to adopt the budget. And so there's a desire from the finance department to add more transparency and opportunities for public input on that. Also, suggestion for updated requirements for reserves and appropriations, again, to be consistent with best practices. And also wanted our office, and we're going to be researching this, the value or legal necessity for five votes to amend the budget. Right now, under our charter, and most charters actually, that's why we want to kind of get to the bottom of it, there's a provision for budgets to initially be approved by a majority of council members, in our case, 4 or more council people to approve the budget. But then when it comes time to amend the budget, and that happens very frequently, the charter calls for 5 votes, more than who approved the budget in the first place. Why? What's the origin of that? What's the legal requirement for that? We're digging into that, and we're going to report out to the group, next time, because it is something that the finance director wanted us to look into. Also, keen interest from the Public Works Department to update Public Works thresholds and standards and to add authority to utilize design build type procurement practices. We talked about that, including basically 2 options on how to approach this issue. Either to increase the very low dollar amounts that are currently in the charter, requiring council approval for contracts and formal bidding and use of city forces. As I think you've heard from us before, the current threshold for that is $1,000. So if the city wants to use its own employees to do a public work valued greater than $1,000, staff report needs to go to council. Council needs to approve that, including any public works project. So there's definitely a desire to revisit that. And the alternative to increasing the dollar limits would be to replace the dollar amounts concept with instead general requirements and checks and balances for how procurement would work, with the details of that to be implemented by ordinance. And so working with public works staff, our goal is to develop a couple of versions of that. One version just increasing the dollar limits with benchmarking, the other version replacing dollar limit concept with this checks and balances concept, all of which would be presented as soon as we hope maybe the next meeting of this group for their consideration and analysis and ultimate recommendation to you. So when we get group 6 scheduled again, and I don't think we have a meeting on the calendar yet, the desire would be to get either Ken Lee or Craig Mobeck. We'll probably do them one at a time, in the room with that group to answer questions and to dig in a little deeper, including with actual drafted language in those sections in order to address these issues and the many others that the fiscal aspects of the charter implicate for updating consistent with best practices. So that's my report out. Member Brooks on that. If there's anyone else from group 6 that wants to add to that, now, Mr. Chair, would be the appropriate time to do it.
This will also be the time if anybody has any questions. I think so, since it was very thorough. But I also ask for a public comment. Is there any public comment on this portion? Yes.
We
Here, if
put
you,
his mic,
push the little
push that
button.
button there.
There you go.
My name's Darren. I don't look like a Darren, but I am a Darren. I'm here. I haven't been in the chambers for over 10 years or so. I work for an employee at Napa. Auto
Aaron, go even
Parts.
closer if you
I'm
could to
sorry.
the mic so we pick, yeah, you can even take a seat. I want to
Testing,
make sure
testing.
you're picked
Okay,
up.
so my name's Darren. I don't look like a Darren, but I am a Darren. I have not been in the chambers for over 10 years publicly. I'm an employee for Napa Auto Parts, Napa Auto Care, Genuine Parts Company. And the only affiliation or connection I have with the staff here at council is I deliver auto parts to the Walsh mechanics. So I'm just gathering information, and I just wanted to wish you guys a happy Valentine's and Merry Christmas, no matter how far we go into the year. I feel like I'm pushing back. I want to actually, Obama makes sense, and makes sense. Bush makes sense. Whether we can go into the Super Bowl, but I'd like to turn back time. I don't need me to do that on getting a stipulation at 546 West Julian. So there's my information's here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any speakers online?
Yes. Wanda Buck, please unmute yourself.
Hello, I just have a question related to Group 4, where you were in the process of pending on consulting commissions. And I'm an advocate for seniors, and I was wondering if, when you listed Parks and Recreation, both the Senior Commission and the Youth Commission are under that. Are those going to be part of the consideration too? It was Group 4.
Group 4, yeah. Glenn?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you, Wanda. That hasn't been part of the current discussions for the group. I think there's somewhere in the range of 12 to 14, boards, commissions, or committees, within the city. You've listed a couple of them. There's not been a lot of discussion other than with respect to the Ethics Commission to elevate any of those to charter status. There is provision in the charter that talks about the city council's ability to form additional boards and commissions in their discretion. And so the members of Group 4 are hearing your interest, in exploring potentially adding those, if I understood you correctly, to the group, but that hasn't been a matter under discussion thus far.
Thank you. And I was just questioning because they're under Parks and Recreation, and that was one of the ones that you had listed. And thank you. That answers my question.
Can you repeat those two real quick so I can write them down and we can discuss it during our next
Right,
meeting?
under Parks and Recreation, and I was on the Senior Advisory Commission, so I'm rather familiar with it. And they were the staff, over our commission, and also the Youth Commission is under Parks and Recreation. And I don't know if there's an actual Parks and Recreation Commission, and then there's those under the Department of Parks and Recreation. There are those two, the youth and the senior commissions.
Yeah,
I
very,
have those both noted down.
yeah,
Right,
very good.
I'm
And
just
that-
bringing it to attention if it's possible, okay?
Very good, thanks. And that's an accurate description. That is the Parks and Recreation staff of the liaisons to that group. But they are independent, commissions, with only the Parks and Rec Commission itself being one that's charter-based, and contemplated and therefore necessary under the city charter. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Is there not a cultural commission too, or something like that?
There is a cultural commission. I don't think Parks and Rec staffs them. Maybe they also do.
They might.
But that is another of them. Yeah. There's 4 or 5 other ones too that are listed. Again, there's no interest in changing any ability of the council to form modify, the other boards and commissions under the charter, but none of those are elevated currently to charter status.
Any other public comment? No. Okay. Any other discussion with the committee? No? Okay. Then we move on to our last business item, which is staff presentation and solicitation of committee input or direction regarding 1, proposed substantial charter reorganization, legal requirements and communications plan, and 2, updated standards for grouping proposed charter modifications within the levels, and 3, project benchmarking and work plan update. Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you'll remember, for those in attendance and or those who might have watched afterwards, we gave a presentation at your last committee meeting of a proposed substantial charter reorganization that would do more than simply update individual sections to eliminate ambiguity, comply with best practices, right, improve wording, but instead took a more holistic look at the charter and said, asks the question, boy, a lot of these provisions don't seem to belong in the same articles, with each other. And a lot of articles potentially could be combined. Since we are doing a comprehensive review of the charter, should we at the same time, propose a reorganization of the charter consistent with this charter project's, assigned duties of making the charter more accessible, more understandable, kind of easier to use. And so in that spirit, staff, as we were going through these different sections and noticing some discombobulation and what we think inapt, organization and structure, proposed a new approach to organizing the charter, keeping as much of it intact and the order, intact, but combining things and moving things around. In your packet, there is an updated version of this proposal. The last one was dated, I think, January 21st. This one's now dated February 18th, 2026. And I want to spin through it very quickly because you heard it, from me before, with the idea being that, hey, this is a big thing. We're going to present it to you once, let you think about it, present it to you again, because the thought was going to be, depending upon your direction, if you're comfortable with this, we would present this kind of as a gut check with the city council in a general update to them of kind of where this committee is at, with its work program, and see if the council is comfortable with this reorganization approach before we go through all of the reorganization effort, which, if the council is not comfortable with it, would be for naught, right? In the end of the day. And so this is your second bite at the apple after an initial presentation of the reorganization. I'm going to spin through it a little bit more quickly this time, talk to you a little bit about the pros and cons of this, and then some related questions that came up, including legal requirements of what goes on the actual ballot, so you understand, what voters would see of this reorganization, and concepts of a communications plan, that might help, facilitate some concerns that this committee and voters might legitimately have of a dramatically kind of reorganized charter. And so first, thanks, Courtney. She's put up the proposed reorganization draft. And it's presented in a couple of different ways. First, a very short summary of what the new sections would be, and then we can go on to the next page. And then in greater detail, you'll see here the description of each article that breaks down the first of all says what that article new title would be, and then the existing articles and sections from throughout the charter that it is thought in this reorganization approach makes sense to combine now in this newly retitled essential terms. And so I'll at least talk about a couple of them as examples, but not everyone, because that would be painful, and you've heard this once before from me. Article 1, for example, essential terms, would take existing articles in sections Article 1, Article 2, Section 400, Section 500, Section 706, and a reference to defined terms, and combine all of them in a newly reconstituted Article 1, which would have in these sections as listed here, the name of the city, the boundaries of the city, the general powers of the city, a general statement of the form of government of the city, where a council manager, form of government, and explain what that means. A section that talks about the relationship with other laws that is currently not as clear as it should be. And then a section, the group that's reviewing Article 1, I think it's Group 1, a section that refers to the fact that capitalized terms in the charter will have the meanings set forth in a defined terms section, which is proposed to be at the very end of the charter. And so, again, the reorganization concept, taking things that logically, belong together and consolidating them in a newly numbered, more clearly identified with better headings article is what the proposal is for this Article 1. Again, the similar approach to Article 2, and that might be the last one I described to you in detail. Again, this document that I think you've got handed out and again was in the packet and is up on the screen here. Can we make it any bigger on the screen for anyone who might be viewing that? Article 2 would now be a consolidated article that talks about the city's elected officials. There's a number of existing articles and sections that span mostly 2 articles now. Section 600, as you can see here, 700, a variety of different sections kind of jumbled together. This newly reconstituted Article 2 would propose to have under Section 200 a general statement of what the city's elected officials actually are. And then Section 201, the required qualifications for those elected officials that are A, applicable to all, B, are only mayor and council, C, chief of police, and D, city clerk. Right now, again, these are in a variety of different sections, including parts in larger, lengthier sections, as opposed to all bundled in one place. Then the powers and duties of those various offices would be the next section, again, listed. And then the election and appointment process with the mayor, city clerk, and chief of police elected citywide, city council members elected by district, term limits that apply to all, vacancy standards and for reappointment, and then clear provisions for the commencement of the term and the oath of their office. And then finally, a separate section, on the compensation. And so on, Mr. Chair. Article 3 is city elections with the same approach to taking sections that are throughout the charter and combining them as listed here. Article 4, city council actions and limitations, taking a variety of different sections spanning actually 3 or 4 different articles and putting them in what appears to all of us in a much more orderly, fashion, so things can be found and used by both professional users and the public alike. Article 5, organization of city government. Article 6 will probably least reorganized, but renumbered because of the renumbering of the rest of it. Appointed boards and commissions. Article 7 would be now a description of the city workforce. Those are the civil service, provisions. And then Article 8, fiscal administration. Article 9 would be public contracting, currently combined, in one article, but it really should be separated. And then Article 10, general provisions, including an expanded list of definitions, the effective date of the charter, and some other miscellaneous provisions, including violations and enforcement. So this document really, again, I presented it in maybe similar detail the last time, is what's proposed in order to, in my estimation and staff's estimation, and we'll see if in your estimation, fully kind of completes this process of a comprehensive top to bottom, review of the city charter. This next slide talks about the pros and cons of this approach, and then I'll dive into some of the other nuances. Arguments in favor of a comprehensive charter organization is that, as I've talked about, it's consistent with the charter project stated purposes, easier to find and what you're looking for, more user-friendly for the public and professional staff, and new tools to include an extensive definitions section and a sections history matrix at the end of the charter, which could also include, the charter currently lacks, actual cross-references to the city code provisions that implement in detail these charter provisions. Right now, the city code has references back to the charter when it implements things, but the charter itself doesn't have that level of detail and suggestion. Hey, if you want to know where this provision is, more fully implemented, to have that, to add that as a tool as well as part of the comprehensive adjustment. There are cons to this approach. And arguments against doing this would be, this could turn off the voting public if it appears that the changes are not being fully explained or evident with or without the full text being presented to them, right? These dramatic changes, particularly if there's an underlying strikeout document, presented to folks, could have people looking at this and go, what the heck are you doing? What are you trying to get away with? I can't follow, what you're doing. Too much, right? Too much in a short period of time for the voters to get comfortable with. If the full text is provided as part of this process also, it would increase the cost of the ballot measure. In other words, if we were going to present an underlying strikeout version of what's being proposed as part of how the registrar bills us, you get charged, for additional pages. We haven't done the costing of that yet, but that will be something we'll benchmark and bring back for yours and the subcommittee's information. And then finally, if the measure was approved by voters, the full implementation of that would really require a review and update of the city code and all other city council policies that refer to the charter, right? There's a number of provisions in the code that say pursuant to charter section, fill in the blank, right? And other references like that. If this were the approach and a lot of changes were made, that would be a necessary exercise, both in training materials, in the city code and city policies. So it's not a small thing. It's something we would know how to do. AI would certainly be helpful, tool in helping us, implement that, but it wouldn't be the last thing you do, right? It would be an additional work element to that. Next slide is legal requirements of what goes before the voters. An appropriate question was asked, and I asked it of myself, and you all mirrored it and asked it back to me in different thoughtful ways. What does have to go in front of the voters if we were going to do this? What do the voters see? And so a little bit of a primer on that to remind you of what the end game would be of this, and then some relevance back to this idea of whether or not to choose to go down the path of a major reorganization. Here are the things that go in front of the voters at the end. First of all is the ballot question. You've all seen this. It's required under the elections code. It has to be 75 words or less. It's supposed to be a true impartial synopsis of what you're asking the voters to consider. And there's goofy, grammatically challenging wording that you're supposed to apply as well. Shall the measure to, provide a comprehensive update to the city charter, including this, that, or the other thing, right? Some of the major things to highlight and reorganization of the sections. And at the end of that sentence, be adopted, right? And it's a yes or no question. And so no matter what, there's the ballot question that needs to be presented. There's also the impartial analysis that actually goes in the ballot that people look at. It's required, if it's referred to the city attorney under the elections code. This impartial analysis is no more than 500 words. So, right, it can be more detailed, but it can't be excruciatingly detailed. 500 words isn't much, particularly for a comprehensive amendment. It's usually prepared by the city attorney unless there's a conflict, in which case the elections official would present it. There could be a conflict if, for example, there was an elected city attorney, like I was, and there were provisions that were proposed to modify the terms for an elected city attorney or that city attorney's salary. In that case, I wouldn't be the right person to write the impartial analysis, right? Because I've got a partial, interest in that. So there's the impartial analysis that goes no matter what, there's a ballot question, no matter what, there's a partial analysis. And then the text of the measure itself, and this is where it gets interesting. It's typical that the text of a measure would be presented to the voters, but is in fact not required. And there is a provision instead that says if the text of the measure is not provided, the impartial analysis must provide, this is quaint, the telephone number of the elections official to obtain a free copy. And it would be the duty of the elections official to mail a free copy of the actual text of the measure to that person. One of the things that I had forgotten and looked back on was, what did Chula Vista do, right, when this process was completed down in Chula Vista? Well, what Chula Vista did with similar reasoning was not include a red line in the ballot measure itself, but instead include at the bottom of the impartial analysis, like the elections code require, the statement that says, hey, if you want a copy of this, of the full text of this measure, call the elections official and we'll mail you one. But of course, we were trying to be modern, so we also said, and you can find a clean version of the proposed charter and a red line version on the city's website with, FAQs explaining, and summarizing in greater detail what's done. And so that's what the elections codes allow. You don't actually have to put either a clean version or an underlined strikeout version. There may be reasons to do that, but you don't actually have to do that. And the approach in Chula Vista, at least, was to instead provide that on the city's, website. And of course, mailing it to somebody if they wanted that. Finally, as you all recall from measures, maybe some of you have written some in favor or against, if in fact someone wants to make an argument or wants to provide a rebuttal or the pro or against arguments for this, that has to be allowed. I'm sorry, it says must be allowed but not required. It's not required that an argument be tendered, but if someone wants to present an argument, they can. And the measure sponsor can designate who makes the pro argument. This group can make a recommendation. Ultimately, the council will decide as to who should make the argument in favor of this measure. Down in Chula Vista, it was the chair of the Charter Review Committee who drafted and made the argument, in favor of that measure for the voters. So, in talking about how to potentially mitigate some of the concerns of the measure being too much for folks, we really need to start thinking about, frankly, regardless of whether there's a comprehensive reorganization or not, right? What kind of communications plan there should be to make sure that both the council and ultimately the voters really understand, what this proposal is. And there could be a number of elements of that. And one of them is interesting that we just may not have the time or the bandwidth to do, but I know that is frequently used by others. And I'll talk about the Sunnyvale project as an important, I think, benchmarking experience for all of us and what they're doing with polling. But it's polling. It's if you've got a question that you're worried about what the public will think about as a matter of communication, in this case, from the public to you and ultimately the city council, it is lawful to spend city dollars because it's not advocating for a particular measure or campaigning for it. It's gathering information to see what the public might think about it of certain questions that you're wrestling with. And if there's a concern about what what the public might think about something is included as part of this, you can survey them and then use that information accordingly, potentially in guiding you as what you want to do. So a polling aspect is something that's not always done, but is done in a good number of cases to find out what the public thinks about things. When the Measure I infrastructure bond, went in front of the public very successfully. In that case, in figuring out how to design that and what kind of projects to include and what people's appetites were for different types of things that might be funded by that, there was a pretty substantial professional survey that was put together to solicit that input, and that provided guidance as to what would go before the public. And so that's an aspect of the communications plan. The ballot question we talked about here. The Charter Review Committee could recommend what that ballot question language is. Ultimately, the City Council will decide that. Could also solicit input from a consultant as to how that ballot question is presented. And then again, ultimately, the City Council decides. How to present the text of the charter update is another important thing to keep in mind. And we talked about this. You could present, but don't have to, a clean version and or the underlying strikeout version of what the committee ultimately, recommends. And again, you're not deciding that, the council is, but you might want to consider that, in your deliberation process. You could present neither and instead provide the notice offer to send a copy required in the elections code in the impartial analysis, as I described the process that was done down in Chula Vista. You could take a step further and provide a link to the text on the city website. Sorry, that's what was done in Chula Vista. And then ultimately, when this measure goes on the ballot, while the city can't, if in fact we get that far and the council decides to do that, the city can't use city resources to campaign or advocate in favor of the measure. However, information can be provided, like for Measure I. In fact, there was a flyer that was sent out, to people that said, hey, on your ballot is this measure, and here's what it does. It can't say vote for Measure I. This couldn't say vote for whatever measure this ultimately is. But in the interest of making sure people understand what you're doing, a good communications plan will include, if not a mailer to people, at least detailed information on the website that describes everything. And so next slide, with all of that information, back to kind of the question that's in front of you, with some of that hopefully being relevant to how you might think about it. Mr. Chair, obviously here to answer questions about this, but ultimately we would be seeking, in order to gut check this approach with the council as soon as possible, some vote or consensus from the committee as whether or not the work plan should include the concept of a comprehensive reorganization of the charter as substantially presented, or as you might suggest otherwise. And then if so, the next step would be for staff to prepare the agenda item to council with some support by a designated representative or two from this committee to provide input and the committee's recommendation on this. So standing by to answer questions that you might have about this and of course, input from the public at this time as well.
Okay, we first go to the committee. Does anybody have either questions or comments?
Yes.
I'm not surprised.
I love when I don't surprise you, Chief. Mr. Goodens, I have a few questions in sequence I want to ask to kind of formulate something here. Originally, when we had this committee set up, given the tasks that we had to do, what was the estimate timeline of completion? And at what point that we would be able to, put this before the voters?
The goal of this committee was, and the desire of the council was, to endeavor to complete this process in time to put a measure on the ballot for 2026. It was recognized that that was a challenging and compressed timeframe. And in order to accomplish that, this committee was really going to need to go through this entire process and develop a report and recommendation to council by, at the latest, early June, but ideally end of May, so that the council could look at what you presented, ask questions, provide input, and potentially send you back, to do additional work before, a final version of that was presented to them. In order for that to get on the ballot for the November 2026 election, all of that process would need to be complete prior to, I think it's August 7th or August 8th, by this year. And with the city council typically taking a recess in the middle of July through the middle of August, really it would all need to be complete with action by the council prior to the middle of July. So compressed and challenging timeframe, that was the idea of trying to accomplish this task.
When would be the next election after midterms?
The charter amendments under California law require alignment with a presidential election. So the next election available for action for an actual charter amendment wouldn't be until 2028.
Requires to be part of the presidential election?
Aligned with that national election, yes.
Okay, because
So
obviously.
you can't do it odd years. It's gotta
Okay,
be-
so
it's-
26 obviously wouldn't.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, not the presidential election. It has to be in every 2-year, general election. Yeah,
Yeah, because
sorry, I misspoke, not the presidential.
no, not a problem. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah, my concern is obviously, there's a lot here and we have the arguments for and against. My thought process was, I'd like to do it, but we're then putting a lot of bundle in one. And here's kind of what I would see. If we did it, one of the things that I would say is the idea is that the net change to the charter is just an organizational change, not any substantive of any kind level change, right? We're just reorganizing it. Everything's the same. Yes, the only thing that's going to be the big effect is the numbering, because then you have to go back to the ordinances and things like that, right? So I could see where Lovett would like to do it, and to kind of maybe assure the voters that, hey, this didn't change anything in a way. Have like some third party, like maybe a law firm, I don't know if it's accounting firm makes sense, to go over that change and saying, hey, listen, here are all the changes that were proposed. And we certify that they're good, they did not in any way change it except for literally numbering and cleaning it up. So that's kind of, my thought process. The problem, of course, we've always said is like you're mixing two things together, and that could be a real challenge. So the other side of it is if we wind up not getting all our committee meetings done and such in time for like June, and given that we already kind of see the cadence, I think that we all showed, Chair, I think we should take a look at, are we timeline wise in general meeting our obligations to get everything reviewed and proposed to the committee in addition to this? And at some point we need to make a determination way before June. Are we taking on too much? So that's kind of my thought.
Mr. Chair, appreciate that. And it really begs the larger question, right? This reorganization concept maybe adds a little bit of work, but can we even get done, right? Even putting the reorganization, aside, can we get done? Or is there an intermediate version of this that either should be prepared concurrently or instead to highlight the significant substantive things that people want to, address? For example, the procurement, issue, making sure that the financial section aligns, with how we currently do business, the alignment with, applicable law. There could be a handful of key things. So instead of the top to bottom, is there, any intermediate interest in identifying a subset, right, of everything as something that this group, might prioritize? So it's a fair inquiry and question. I actually talk about later in this, the updated work plan, what I believe is to be the almost certainty that we will need as we get close to, we hope, right, with all the work done through the committees, a recommendation from this group at one or two, maybe even more, kind of additional meetings of this larger group to go over all of the different, committee recommendations and make sure there's a comprehensive, charter amendment that this group is prepared to, recommend to the city council. As you saw, and they won't all be as detailed as this, right? You've already had an experience with actual review of charter language, right? That Sue Reuter presented, a couple meetings ago, for your direction and action, maybe last meeting, it seems like longer. And so, there's going to need to be 6 of those, right? Presentations. And that section was relatively small, right? Compared to some of the other ones that are going to be more substantial. So we're really digging in now. We're making good progress, I think, on the work. But there's almost certainly going to be, regardless of whether we do this, you support this reorganization or not, kind of a rush and a need for, additional meetings for this group in order to meet that timeline. And we'll touch on that a little bit more, Mr. Chair, when I get to the benchmarking part and I talk about the Sunnyvale experience, because it is informative of how they went about what they did, how much analysis they did, and the time that they did by comparison to this enterprise that we're all engaged in.
Other questions?
Yeah. Is it possible to come up with the least expensive way to do this reorganization? Because you brought up, we can bring in consultants, we can do polling and so on, and all of those are additional expenses. So one would want to know what the cost of, the potential reorganization would be. And it's not just in terms of the cost of putting it on the ballot, but then kind of in another bucket is the cost of the staff's time. And I know if you're a salaried person, you think, well, it doesn't cost me anything. But the truth is it impacts other projects, what's not getting done because your staff is dealing with this reorganization. So I'd be interested to know what doesn't get done or gets low priority now. I do like the idea of kind of making this a 2-step process. Let's do what we are asked to do and then come back in 2 years and do the reorganization. It seems somewhat logical to me.
2 years from now, you got more things to change, and we're addressing it in the same fashion, right? We got amendments we want to make, and then we also want to clean up the charter. So,
but if we do our job, we have taken care of most of the big stuff.
But we have to be conservative about that too. We got to make sure we don't kick the can down the road to somebody else that has to then, do the work. But I agree with you. If we do a good job here, it should be clean within 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you one thing. The value proposition, I made an assumption, was, hey, this is causing us problems by not having this cleaned up. And so I think people would ask that question. It's like, okay, what's the value in doing this? Is it, there's so many problems. Has it caused us money or time or effort in the past? How much is this really fixing? Is it worth, like you were saying, okay, of all the stuff we have to do, is it really going to pay for itself in some way later on? Because obviously, money is important, time is important. And if it's making a significant, return on us, then that's a good value proposition to bring up.
Yeah, I appreciate the thought process there. A couple of responses to that. This is already, without even the reorganization, a pretty big swing at the bat, right? It's a significant endeavor. And the thought in even tendering this to you is, if we're taking this big a swing at the bat, take the biggest swing at the bat, right? And get it all done at the same time. But if that creates more problems than it's worth, right? And doesn't deliver cost benefit, in the grand scheme of things, should we really do that? There are certain aspects of what we're doing that's pretty easy to, not easy, but easier than other things to say this adds a lot of value. The most obvious one is the procurement, mechanism, right? To eliminate the amount of time staff needs to produce staff reports and bring very small matters to city council, saves a substantial amount of money in staff time and allows staff to work on other things that are more important as opposed to routine things.
Well, my apologies. I was referring specifically just to the reorg of the
Yeah, and I'll get to that.
Not the amendments that we're trying to bring.
I'm sorry, I'm taking longer than I should to get to that question. The other value there, of course, is in design build, substantial potential value in time and cost savings, in implementing these projects. By contrast, the value added of the reorganization is a lot harder to quantify, right? It's not as tangible. You end up with a better document that's more transparent and useful to people than the previous document is. Is that a value add to someone who's looking at the charter and trying to understand it and figure out how government works? It is, but hard to put dollars and cents on that. Will it save my group time and city staff time and having a clear, understanding of where things are and what things say? 100%. But how much more value does the reorg add to that as opposed to merely approving language? It's really, I think it's more qualitative than it is quantitative. And it's a fair question to ask and kind of a hard one for me to say, yeah, that's worth $400,000, right? Of city staff time, or effort. It really is more the idea of ending up with something that's easier to use and understand and refer to, as opposed to ability to translate that into actual cost savings. I'll think about that further, but I bet I'm not going to be able to quantify it much better than that.
Question or statement. Initially, I was thinking that a large-scale reorganization would be an issue in presenting this information to the public. They might find on their doorstep a phone book that contains the text and the amended text of this charter, and they would not be interested in reading it. And so they would simply vote no. But learning that we can have a concise description of the change, followed up with links to where the information might be available online, where they might be more comfortable reading it, especially given that many people don't look at newspaper anymore. I feel it's much more likely, it's a better approach to provide the revised charter, the new organization, because it'll look more organized and understandable to most people. It won't look as antiquated. So I believe it will help with the becoming adopted by the population. So I think it's in my mind, this totally changes how I feel about the work we're going on here. Secondly, regarding these other communication plan, the polling, for example, I don't think given your timeline, you have time to do polling. And if you did do polling, you wouldn't have time to react to any polling. So I'm not sure that makes much sense in hiring a law firm. Same thing, it'll take them some time to review. After we've actually presented the material to review, it'll be too late to do much with it. So I feel that given the timeline, that we should just move forward with the plan as we started working towards right now.
Any other? Susan?
As you were presenting, and honestly, even before you presented the organization, as I was reviewing the document, maybe it's just how my mind works as well. The reorganization just makes a lot of sense. I had it in detail earlier today, in particular with the sections that my subcommittees are covering. So in general, I think that we would have a missed opportunity if we're doing a comprehensive review. We don't consider reorganization in a way that makes sense. I do understand the tight timeline, so I am curious to kind of see your later presentation, because I think we do obviously need to consider the quality. I'd also be interested in thinking how much more of the committee time would it take, first of all? We did the reorg. My guess is not a huge amount. If we're just moving things around, I think there'll be significantly more staff time. And that was kind of the question that you had, Mark. But I like the idea if we can get it done. I have some concern about doing a two-step process. I don't know if it's realistic to think about having another committee like this in 2 years. Committee's time, kind of go through this process again. We can come out of this with some really improved language, updates that meet what we've been chartered to do, and a clean document going forward. I think it
Anyone else?
If I might comment briefly, Chair, to a couple of those remarks, Member Peters, I appreciate those remarks. I think you're right. I think the reorg is more of a imposition on staff as opposed to the groups. You guys are all going through the sections, anyway. That's the substance, of the work. I think the reorganization itself is substantive too, but it would be more of a staff time exercise than it would be more, committee meetings. I also agree, while I understand the thought behind two-stepping, the idea of standing up a whole other committee, educating them about the whole process and having a whole other exercise of things, that itself, the staff time and infrastructure, right, that went into conceiving of this committee, soliciting, participation, appointing all of you, updating, everybody. That was a pretty substantial investment, right, in the human capital, of you. And, another exercise like that would be another exercise, like that. So there could be some inefficiencies and challenges with that. So in thinking about it myself and hearing you talk about it, I agree with a number of those observations. I think that's it, Mr. Chair, of my reaction.
Okay. From what I've heard too, I support doing the whole, it seems from your presentation, the work's basically done on the reorganization. It's already done. It's reorganized. We just have to put in the information. I'll lean back more. But anyways, I understand having to go to council would be an issue. I'd be happy to present with council if somebody else wanted to present with me as well. So I guess the idea at this point is we need to decide as a group, are we going to move forward with the comprehensive review, which would require going to council?
I would recommend that, at least a gut check with council to make sure they're comfortable with it before we go down the path.
Yeah, I thought we already agreed on that. I thought we already agreed to do that.
Speaking of two-step processes,
We would go to council, make sure. that we're going
I did not ask for kind of consensus vote the last time because I thought it was a big thing, for you to consider. This is really the meeting at which you would decide to direct to go to council. Yeah. I wanted it to sit with you for a little bit, for everyone to think about it, because it was a lot all in one meeting, and thought better for me to request of you this formal direction indicating your support for this process before we rushed into that.
I'd just like to point out that last meeting, you did not have a complete copy of what your plan was. So now we have that. So
Yeah, it was a draft at that point. It has been completed with some additional thought and arguments behind the legal aspects of it too. So hopefully this is additional, better information for you to feel comfortable if you decide to proceed, or uncomfortable if you don't. Wanted to make sure you had the benefit of that. And Mr. Chair, further discussion is certainly appropriate, but we do want to go to public at this time on this item too, if there's any thoughts from the public.
Is there any public that would like to comment on this?
There's not.
Bringing it back to the group for discussion, would anybody like to propose a motion? Follow the recommendation
Looking for a motion to bring it to city council?
to take the proposed reorganization to city council, because as Glenn said, if they're not in favor of reorganizing the whole thing, why would we even try?
Okay, so I was thinking that maybe what you wanted to do is first saying, hey, as a group, do we want to decide to take it on? And then if we do, then go to city council, make two motions? Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair, it could be one. I mean, if there's support, I guess the motion that I might conceive is if it would be to support the recommended, it's even kind of in a version of it on there, support work plan that includes a comprehensive reorganization of the charter substantially as presented, with direction to go to council to get council input, and approval of that. That would be, I think, in one motion.
So move as you said.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? Second by Susan. Excellent. Staff roll call vote.
Holly Roberts,
Yes.
Pat Nikolai,
Yes.
Bernard Tanzi,
Yes.
John Brooks,
Yes.
Joe Sasinski. Oh, he logged. Eric Crutchlow,
Yes.
Lauren Diamond,
Yes.
Eric Jensen, Mark Beckman,
yes.
Susan Peters.
Yes.
Excellent. So we move to the second portion of this.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, now, and less formally, really by consensus, you can decide who you might want to designate. Once we get a report together and get this agendized, to assist with that presentation and recommend the committee.
Does anybody want to talk in front of council? I've done it many times, and if somebody else wants to do it, I'll be happy. Ollie? Bernard?
Yeah, I'll assist you.
Ollie and Bernard. Is that okay with everybody?
When will this city council meeting be?
We've got to coordinate the city council and staff are pretty bananas right now. So we'll have to find as the nearest possible date, for presenting on this. I'm not sure we can conceive of this quite as a consent item. I think it's going to at least need some, presentation, but we'll look at that and coordinate with the two of you in order to make sure that you're available when that presentation might be necessary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You want to move to the second portion, Glenn?
Yes, ready to. One of the things that I had started to do that we've talked about in general terms But that is an important thing for us to keep in mind as we go forward, is this concept of levels of the changes. It's not going to be presented to the public as this, in this way, but it's really a tool to think about the changes that are being made in the ultimate presentation to council, and in order for the council to decide what belongs in one comprehensive amendment and what might be better off to be either presented at the same time, but as a separate ballot measure, or put in the parking lot, if you will, for further consideration and analysis, depending upon the nature of the issue that's being presented. And so these next few slides talk about those levels. I don't think you need to decide on this now, but I wanted to at least socialize it with you at a certain point at your next or the meeting after that, because for your final report, we're going to want to make sure we're categorizing, the changes, so council can think about it in this, strategic way. These concepts to start firming them up. So this is really a presentation and solicitation of feedback on the various levels. Level 1, as presented here, and I'll read it, are changes that change the form and appearance that are not substantive. It includes corrections, rewording for clarity, reorganization, elimination of redundancies, consistency of cross-references and numbering, consolidation of sections, elimination of headings for previously deleted sections, rewording of headings to better reflect content, the addition of subheadings, defined terms, and other charter-wide conventions to improve comprehension and usability, right? All the stuff that really doesn't change substance at all. There may be some subtle little substantive things in there, but each one of the committees has experienced this as we've been going through the different sections as to, words that are no longer make sense, better grammar, again, the elimination of a lot of the surplus dead sections, right, that are embedded within the charter, subheadings that are headings and subheadings that make sense, all the stuff, including the reorganization concept that really doesn't change, anything. That's a level 1, proposed, change. And there'll be a fair amount of that, a good amount of that, and we want to be able to describe that to council. The next slide here, level 2. Level 2 starts to get a little bit more substantive, and that is rewordings, deletion, and additions intended to add clarity. There's going to be a little overlap, right, between 1 and 2. Fill gaps, eliminate ambiguities, replace outdated, no longer used practices with current best practices, and provide consistency with state law. A good example of this would be the modification of the budget section to allow for a 2-year budgeting, right? Something we currently do. It's not a nothing change. It's a change, but it's something the council's used to, is considered to be a best practice, and an appropriate change. Another change would be, for example, of the things I mentioned tonight, the deletion of the language in the boards and commissions section that arguably violates the Brown Act and is inconsistent with the Brown Act, right? Things like that need to be updated, but they're more than just rewordings, right? They're actually, some meaningful changes. So as we go on here, some changes are substantive, but are not thought to be that significant or made in sensitive areas so as to warrant consideration as possible separate ballot measures, right? Those are level 2 type changes. And a lot of what is being proposed is going to be in this level 2, category. And no matter what, both level and level 2 changes will be recommended in the combined, ballot measure. You may recall when we started out, we had 3 levels. I'm now gone to a 4th level based on some of the things that folks have brought up. But level 3 is, as presented here, changes to policies or procedures that may be considered best practices or are otherwise viewed as desirable, and that the CRC, that's you, recommends, but either involve political sensitivity or are of such independent significance that they may justify consideration as separate ballot measures. An example here might actually be the procurement changes. This was not an issue down in Chula Vista when the Chula Vista did its comprehensive amendment, because that was actually a whole separate charter process that went as a standalone measure, right? If there's some concerns that, even though it all makes sense to us, right, and it's a best practice, that there's some sensitivity around, the procurement, changes, that work should be done, but it might be identified as a level 3 change so that the council can evaluate, hey, is that really a best practice that we're all comfortable with and belongs in the one single comprehensive measure, or should it be considered as not necessarily something that people will easily accept, but still important to propose? Let's put it in front of people, separately. An example of a level 3 type change. I'm not trying to predispose you to characterizing that as level 3, but it's that kind of concept. Level 3 change, as another example, might be if there's folks who think that the Measure R provisions that talk about prohibit either disposition or changes of use to designated city park, property without a vote of the people. But there's a desire to clarify that to go, hey, if it's just an ancillary use that doesn't compromise, the use of the park, is it something that could be done temporarily without a vote of the people? For example, and this could be controversial in and of itself, if there was a desire to put telecommunications, facilities, like some kind of monopole at the edge of a park, right? That's something that might make sense to do. I'm not trying to say one way or the other whether it does or not, but right now that would require a vote of the people, right? And you just couldn't use that park land, for that purpose, unless there was some clarification to Measure R. Measure R is a big deal in this community. Was highly, I think, supported and approved, with concerns that park property might be, diverted for some other purpose. And so, even though, and you could argue, I'm not trying to create a debate over the particular example I identified, for tonight, because that's not even been discussed with the subcommittee yet. But even though it all makes sense, is it in such a sensitive area that if anyone's going to propose anything like that, it should be viewed as a level 3 change, either not to be done at all, or if it's really that important, to be tendered as a separate measure. And as I note here, ideally level 3 changes would be combined with level 1 and level 2 changes, because everyone thinks they make sense. It is considered a best practice. It's not trying to do anything, truly dramatic, but just trying to make things, consistent with practices, but it still may warrant separate consideration because of that sensitivity. Finally, level 4. People in this group have good ideas and concepts, for things, and may even have been attracted to this, this committee because you had strong feelings, about certain things that you wanted to be discussed and potentially added to the charter. But they may go above and beyond the charter project concept of updating the city charter, right, to be more efficient, consistent with best practices, reorganization, and make it user-friendly. Those, in my head, could be level 4 changes. Hey, it's important stuff, but it's too much and not as aligned with this project. But let's identify that, right? As something that if the council wants to consider it at some future, a date, they could form a different, charter review committee to take those things up. We don't want to lose those things, right? In the good engagement with all of these activities. So level 4, possible changes to the charter that are either too complicated or too significant to have been fully analyzed or appropriate for consideration as part of this charter update project. but are worthy of further study and consideration in the future. One thing I heard a committee member mention in kind of in this category, and that a lot of other jurisdictions do take up, is this concept of ranked choice voting, right? Changing the voting, structure with the idea of making it less partisan, right? And a mechanism where, the argument goes, you get more, mainstream, people instead of extreme, views of things. Different jurisdictions have done this. It is a very complicated thing, and you can debate this, all day long. But is that something that might be identified for the council? Hey, someday let's look at ranked choice, voting. Potentially it could. That would be a level 4, if the desire of this group to identify things like that. So it really is more of my interest in not losing track of the thinking and efforts of this group on the one hand, and on the other hand, though, not distracting and getting the group too drawn down into things that are just so intense and so complicated that we really couldn't possibly do it justice. It's going to be hard enough to do, the level 1 and 2, 3, analysis justice in the time we have. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair, on our kind of articulating what these levels are. Again, nothing you need to act on now, but definitely interested in this group's and potentially the public's, input on this ultimate categorization of the work that you're going to do, because it will very much be part of the presentation to council.
Okay, did anybody have any questions or comments? Any questions or comments from the public? There are none. Great. I guess, Glenn, we can.
Sorry, I had a question.
Sorry.
First of all, I appreciate that you did this so we can talk actually about these changes. But one question was regarding levels 3 and 4. Were these ballot measures dependent upon the larger charter to be passed? They wouldn't, if they pass and the larger charter measure didn't pass, they would not be implemented. Is that the way you would approach this?
I'm sorry, could you say that once more for
So
me?
if these level 3s and 4s are separate ballot measures,
Mm-hmm.
if they pass and the larger ballot measure, the larger charter change does not pass, they not get implemented. In other words, are they dependent on the larger?
Oh, that's a good question. I wasn't thinking of them in that way. I think the idea would be whatever measure got put in front of the public, if it passed, it would be passed and they wouldn't be reliant on one another.
You would have to provide language for either or in that case.
Yeah, there are from time to time measures that are presented to the public that are linked because they relate, to one another in a way. Hey, if you do this or do that, or sometimes they're presented as an alternative, and you say the one that gets the highest votes, is the one that passes. There's a number of different exotic things that can be done. I wasn't thinking of anything exotic with the level 3 and level 4 type measures. I think the desire would be that to the extent any of them are put in front of the public, the idea would be the more of them pass, the better, as opposed to, one being dependent on the other.
Thank you.
Okay, Glenn. Should we get a
Very good. We're getting close to the end. The last thing I wanted to present to you was kind of an updating on the benchmarking that we've done. And there's been some recent goings-ons, in our, in the region, here that I wanted to bring to the attention of the committee and potentially think about those as, lessons, for us about, how to go about the business of completing this project. First of all, as I mentioned last time, we have posted comparable charters on the city's website, meeting one or more of the following criteria there of a certain population, operation of municipal utility, home to a stadium, a neighbor city right within the region, or the city of Chula Vista as my most recent example, and a thing that might draw lessons from. And so those are already up there. But If any of you have been following the charter news like I do in the region, you may have noticed that the City of Sunnyvale Charter Review Committee actually issued their final report on their proposed charter changes, and they presented that to their council on February 3rd, 26. In addition, I just saw an article about the City of Mountain View City Council also now considering a charter update process. Are they copying us? Maybe. I'll quote from the article in a minute. But first of all, the Sunnyvale report is interesting, and I didn't include that in the agenda. I think I'll upload it in our comparable, charters, section, so that the public can get it and you guys can access it, there as well, because it's actually a very comprehensive and well done report. I thought. And there could be some good things to extract from that on how to present things. But in summary, the Sunnyvale project was a culmination of an 18-month process with actually about 12 months of CRC meeting and analysis on their version, of the charter project. As I mentioned, the final report and the recommendations document, while it was completed back on December 4th, it was presented to the Sunnyvale City Council at their February 3rd, 2026 meeting. And the process was initiated really by a council referral to consider kind of identified issues that the council had themselves, put together in a memorandum. And those issues that they'd identified included extending appointed city council terms to the next November election. In order to be more efficient, as opposed to if you appoint someone and you want that position to be, and it's just an interim appointment and you want it to be filled by an election, their charter currently says that election will occur at the next feasible election. That's usually a special election, and those are very, very expensive. And so this is kind of a pragmatic thing that says, hey, if we're going to appoint somebody, serve until November so we can have a consolidated, less expensive election. So that was something they took up. City council compensation is something that they took up with pretty dramatic results. I'll mention in a sec. They wanted to consider alternative voting systems there, including potentially ranked choice voting there, and establish more specific rules for redistricting. A lot of cities recently, including Santa Clara, not that long ago, went to district elections. And the terms for how that was created were implemented, but Santa Clara did not implement a process for how the redistricting process would work, which will need to start once the 2030 census data comes out, because that's the obligation. When you've got districts, you're supposed to adjust them every 10 years. At least in response to the, I think they call it diennial, is that the term for it, or decennial, census. And so Sunnyvale said, hey, we need to start thinking about that and implement a process for that. The referral also asked them to look at general charter review for other possible addition and updates. So both a specific and a general council referral to the charter review committee there was initiated. They held 16 public meetings from February until December 2025. That seems like a lot, but I will note that they did not have subcommittees. I think between the combination of our subcommittee meetings and your meetings here, we're going to have quite a few. I think you already have had 15 or 16, subcommittee meetings. It'll probably be 30 or 40, but by the time we're done with this process. But they did have 16 public meetings. 3 issues were surveyed with the public, and this is really why I mentioned polling. It is a thing that's done. They had the time to do it, and they actually programmed that into their work plan. The 3 issues they polled was the city council appointment surveyed. Sorry, the polling is going to come there. Was the city council appointment process, city council compensation, and the city manager authority to settle claims. So while they were doing the analysis, they actually prepared and issued surveys, to the public to see what the public thinks of those things. I thought that was curious. Some of it's a little wonky to survey the public on. Some of it appropriate, right? City council compensation would be a thing you'd want to ask the public, before you tendered any of that. They ended up developing a list of 23 potential amendments. And these were ultimately narrowed down to 5 issues that I've identified here: possible increase to city council mayor salaries, the modification of the city council terms, change the number of city council meetings from 2 per month to 24 per year. That sounds familiar probably to you. Increase the city manager authority to settle claims above 50K per year. That's something we're looking at as well, by the way. And expand public procurement to add design, build, and other mechanisms. That'll also sound familiar. We're not the only ones observing these things and feeling, encumbered by these things and desiring to further empower, the local jurisdiction to do these things. Sunnyvale was engaged in this process as well. So possible takeaways, in my observation, and you guys can look at this report, I think it's worth looking at and thinking about. But my preliminary takeaways is, boy, there was a lot of staff background work and analysis of issues that have clearly been under discussion for many months, if not years. They didn't really take up that many issues, but they dove deep, into them with a lot of staff work and analysis. Their ultimate recommendations, though, actually appear to require only minor language changes. So a very easy by comparison, but different exercise than this one, right? This exercise is much more every section, top to bottom, reword, make corrections. They really are focused on a handful of issues, and their changes didn't need to be, that substantial. I thought they had really good discussions and analysis of a number of issues that we could look at and actually use ourselves in evaluating issues, because they reused a lot of benchmarking in the same region, of course, that we're operating in. It included a deeper analysis than I would have imagined necessary for the 2 meetings per month versus 24 meetings per year. They did so much analysis on this, they ultimately concluded not to recommend, that change. Part of that, interestingly, is related to one of their other recommendations, which was to dramatically increase the salary of city council and mayor. I think their current, and Member Crutchlow, this is what you would pointed out. No, I think it's 6K per year. That's not actually what it is, I'm 6K per month. It's not actually what it is now, but it is what's recommended. They currently, I think annually, council people there make approximately $40,000 a year, $39,000 and some change. The proposed recommendation from this Charter Review Committee would increase their salary of city council people to $72,000, per year. The mayor makes 90,000, I think. 108,000. Was that what it was? 9,000 a month? So 108, yeah, 108. So very, very significant, compensation changes. Not something this group's talking about, here, but part of their analysis on the 2 per month to 24 a year was, hey, we're proposing huge increases to salaries. We don't want to look like we're reducing their workload, right? So I get that. That might have been contextual, for what their recommendation was, but very interesting, in-depth, and strategic analysis on their part. They also analyzed the 50K settlement authority in depth, ultimately recommending that the dollar limit be eliminated, but that an ordinance be prepared concurrently to be adopted by the city council that would set, if the charter amendment passed. Member Jensen, to your point, this actually was a little bit, these 2 things were linked. They proposed a modification to the city manager's settlement authority without numbers, but left it to the city council to determine what the proper settlement authority benchmark would be. And they're having, if in fact the charter measure passes, that ordinance immediately going into effect to increase it to 150K. So an interesting, approach there. And they also had a very good, I thought, discussion about, and this is one we're going to use in part of our briefing of the subcommittee and ultimately the CRC, because there's good benchmarking here. You'll also hear, of course, the expertise of the city's own, in-house professionals on these procurement mechanisms, but they talked a lot about the value of design, build, and other procurement mechanisms, in their analysis. Notably, their existing language in their charter has no dollar limits on what those thresholds are. They either never had that, or there was a previous charter amendment that moved all of that to an implementing ordinance. All they had to do in their case was add design build. And so really good report. Their final report was about 32 pages with a lot of attachments to it. Very in-depth analysis of only a handful of issues. I was jealous of both the time that they had, to do that and some of the tools that they employed, including with their presentation to council. And apparently council supported all of their recommendations. A council desired to proceed with polling on these issues before they actually decide whether or not to put these measures on the ballot. So more focused process, a lot more time, and a lot more tools, applied there in evaluating the viability of some of their changes. Mountain View also had a study session on February 10th, where there was a concept presented to the council for proposed amendments that were intended to be, this should sound familiar, non-controversial and limited to technical changes, including correcting typos, language updates, and alignment with state law. The actual, I think, amendments that may have been put together already, I didn't actually see the item, was developed by the city attorney's office based on reviews of other area charters, including Santa Clara's, to identify best practices. I hope they didn't look at ours too closely, because we're identifying best practices now in the process. And their examples include gender neutrality, 30 to 60 days for council appointments, update qualifications for board and commission members, and relatively humble in some respects by comparison to what the enterprise that we're taking up, which is both, a source of pride for me and a source of concern that we're taking on so much, in the time that we are, but we're moving forward. And then they're proposing actually, to Member Crutchlow's point, actually the reverse, right? They're doing a little bit of a tweaking here on their charter, but potentially digging into more substantive changes in their 2028, measure. So a little bit of the reverse what you talked about. So, Mr. Chair, that is my desire to update you on other things that are going on. Hopefully that context is helpful for us as we go forward. The final slide I had, for you as a preview of your next meeting, March 18th, 2026 at 6 p.m. I think we're in City Council chambers again. We're going to approve the minutes here. You're going to get report outs for subcommittees. And then staff reports, updates, solicitation of committee input I'm previewing it now, possible need for additional, meetings and follow-ups on requested items for the CRC or subcommittees. Hopefully by that date, we'll have gotten in front of the council and gotten direction back from them on yay or nay, on the proposed reorganization. At least we'll be able to report out on status of that. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the indulgence. Again, hearing from me a lot tonight. Open to any questions about any of the benchmarking, any of the other issues that we presented before we go on to the final stages of this meeting.
Any questions for Glenn? No. Any public comments?
You're not.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the public, that would be the public presentations portion, right?
All
Where
right,
people
so-
could comment on any particular item.
Yeah, so this item is reserved for persons who wish to address the committee on any matter within the subject matter jurisdiction of the committee that is not on this agenda. The law does not permit committee action or extended discussion of any item not on the agenda except under special circumstances. The governing body or staff may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed. An appropriate body may request staff to report back at a subsequent meeting. Members of the public who wish to address the committee on a non-agendized item should request to speak at this time by giving a request to speak form to staff or raise your hand icon if attending virtually.
No,
Any speakers on Zoom?
No, they're not.
and no one in chambers, Mr. Chair. So you have fully acquitted yourself of the public presentations portion of the agenda.
Excellent. Does anybody have any additional comments?
Thank you, staff. Very good and appreciate your time for doing all this.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your guys' time for indulging, me and considering all the different kind of work plan challenges we have with getting this over the finish line. I would suggest, Mr. Chair, after adjournment, that again, anyone who wants to try to schedule with their groups, your next subcommittee meeting, we'll hang around, and consult with you on that. Thank you.
Excellent. Then the meeting is now adjourned at 8:06 PM.